Hi everyone, this is Adam Virgil, and today we're going to learn about Google Sheets. Google Sheets is a powerful spreadsheet tool that Google provides. It's one of the applications or software platforms that are a part of the Google Suite, including Google Slides and Google Docs. And the way that Google Sheets works is that it is all web-based. If you've used Microsoft Excel before, you can download Microsoft Excel to your PC or to your computer or laptop and use it offline. Google Sheets you can also use offline, but the way that you get to it is through the internet or a web browser. The web browser that I like to use is Google Chrome. You might use Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge or Mozilla Firefox, Safari. There are a bunch of others. But we're going to go into Google Chrome to access Google Sheets. Let's make this big. My picture is right here. This is because I'm logged in to my Google account. Once we go to google.com, let's just go to google.com because you might not open up right to this Google page. My face is here. I'm logged into my Google account. What we also see are this array of 9 dots. This is where all the Google applications are. If we click on these 9 dots, we're going to see a bunch of different Google applications. And if we scroll down, eventually we'll see Sheets. This is Google Sheets. If we click on Google Sheets, we'll be brought to a page where we have all of our sheets, or the sheets that belong to the account that we're logged in as, and the sheets that the account that is logged in has access to. We'll also see a bunch of templates that we can use to start creating a new sheet, and this will help give us a jump start to that, or we can create a new sheet from scratch with this blank plus icon. We can view the template gallery by clicking on this button here, and we'll see a bunch more templates that Google provides us. Now, what if we're not logged into our Google account? I'll sign out. Say continue. And let's go to google.com again. Now it's asking me to sign in. If you want to use Google Sheets, the first thing that you should do is create a Google account. I'm going to sign back into mine. I'll select my name and I'll enter in my password. Now, if I go back to Google Sheets, through the applications, I'll see what I saw at the beginning. Another way to get to Google Sheets, and this happens to be the way that I typically do it, is just in the web browser or on Google, I'll type in Google Sheets. And then I look for something that has google.com with Sheets after it, and I'll click on that link. And once we're here, which is google.com/sheets/about, we can actually navigate to Google Docs, Google Slides, and Google Forms. But if we stay on this Google Sheets tab, we can click Go to Google Sheets, and we get to the same place. Now to create a new Google Sheet, we can click on this plus button. And this is what a new Google Sheet looks like. We'll go over that in a second. But first, I want to show you another way to create a Google Sheet. In our browser, we can type in sheet or sheets.new and click enter, and that will also create a Google Sheet. Let's remove this one, and let's remove this tab because we don't need them anymore, and let's start exploring the Google Sheets interface. The Google Sheets interface can be very overwhelming. There are lots of menus, there are lots of icons and buttons, and there are lots of letters and numbers everywhere. It can be confusing. What I suggest that you do is familiarize yourself with each of these menus. Now, these menus are very similar to other software platforms that you may have been exposed to. We have a file menu, and most of the things in the file menu relate to creating a new Google Sheet, opening a Google Sheet that you have, or delivering the sheet in some way, whether that be via email, as a download, or printing. There are other things in here too, like deleting the sheet and renaming the sheet, and moving the sheet within your Google Drive. And as you might expect, the Edit menu has a lot of editing options, where you can undo what you just did, redo what you just undid, or cut, copy, and paste things around. You can also use Find and Replace, which is a very powerful feature, which will help you navigate your sheet and find some things that you're looking for. You can also delete things in this menu. When we go to the View menu, we have an option to freeze panes, where one row or one column is frozen so that you can scroll across your sheet and those things won't move. And you can always freeze more than one row or more than one column. Whether or not you want to see the grid lines, let's see what happens when we uncheck that. Now all of the grid lines are off. This might be something that's beneficial when you're building a dashboard or something that you want to print as a PDF and show to other people. We can just go back to View and check the grid lines back in. Now they reappear. Also in the View menu, we have the ability to show the formula bar or exclude it. We can also zoom in. Right now we're at 100%. We can go to 150 and everything will get way bigger. If we want to unzoom, we can also use this icon up here on our formula bar. Click it and go back to 100. And now let's see what happens when we remove the formula bar. But I actually just lied, because the formula bar is actually right underneath where we click that 100% sign. If we hide it, the bar beneath goes away. And to bring it back, we can simply go to View and check it again. And now it's back. This will be a very important thing, especially if you use formulas. I always advise keeping this formula bar here. Also in the View menu, we have the ability to protect ranges. That can be really important, especially when you have multiple people collaborating on a single sheet. You may not want some people editing calculations or formulas that you have, because if they did, it could break the sheet. You also might only want certain collaborators to see certain things, and you can deal with that by protecting ranges, and we'll go over that a little bit later. Now, let's investigate the Insert menu. As you might expect, you can insert things. We haven't gotten into rows and columns yet, but we can add rows or columns to this sheet through this menu. And it's important to mention that there are hotkeys or keyboard shortcuts for a lot of these things, and you can also use your mouse or trackpad to do a lot of these things as well that do not require going into the menu. Google Sheets has a lot of really cool features, and this Insert tab is full of them. You can insert charts, you can insert images, you can even make your own drawings and put them in here. You can even integrate your own form via Google Forms, which is essentially a survey. You can create questions and have people answer them, and have all that data come into your Google Sheets. It's a pretty cool feature. You can also insert functions from here. We're going to get into functions a little bit later, but what we can see here is there are a lot of them, and a lot of different categories. We have the main ones, which are sum, average, count, max, and min, which, as you might expect, sum gets you a total. Average will give you an average, count will count some things, max will give you the maximum value, min will give you the minimum value, but we're already beyond the scope of where we're at, so let's pause this for a second. You can also insert links, whether it be to websites or to other Google Sheets that you have, and you can do checkboxes and even add your own notes. Comments are also really cool and very powerful, especially when collaborating with others. You can tag people in comments, just like you do on social media, and you can set it up so that they receive an email. And when they click on that email to address your comment, they'll be brought right to the cell where that comment is, which makes it very easy to collaborate. Now, let's move on to the Format menu. You can create your own theme, which we're not going to cover in this video. You can also format the cells by making them, or the text in the cells, by formatting what they look like. Do you want it to be a number, a percentage, and a variety of others, including the ability to create your own custom formats. Bold, italic, underline, strike through. You can change the font size, the alignment, how the text is wrapped in cells, whether it's rotated or not, and a variety of other things. In the data menu, we have things that relate to sorting and filtering and data validation, as well as named ranges and some other more complicated tasks. We'll get into some of these tasks a little bit later. In the Tools menu, we have the ability to create a form, just like we had in the Insert form area, that we can create in Google Sheets or in Google Forms. We can also edit the script and create macros. For anyone that has used Excel, Google Sheets works the same way in that you can create routines for Google Sheets to perform. They might be tricky or tedious routines, like you might have a certain formatting that you like on your tables to present them. For example, you might want your header to always have an orange background and a white font. You could create a simple routine using macros or the script editor, and then with a click of a button, apply that routine to all of your tables. Essentially, macros allow you to do things quickly or more efficiently in Google Sheets. In the script editor, as well as macros, they tie in together, allow you to expand beyond the functionalities just within Google Sheets itself. The script editor and the macros are done in JavaScript. If you know JavaScript, or you know how to code JavaScript, then you will be fine with the script editor. Macros, you can just record your screen and perform tasks and save them. Automatically, the script or the code will be created for you, and you can call on those macros or those routines when you need them. The add-ons is an interesting menu because Google Sheets actually offers a lot of different add-ons that can help you with what you're doing. We're not going to get into that in this video. The Help menu is super helpful. It's ironic, but it's true. You can actually search all the other menus in the Help menu. For example, if we need a reminder on how to make things bold, we can start typing in bold and it'll tell us. Or maybe we want to add some borders, B-O-R-D-E-R. And actually, if we click on the border type outside borders, since we have cell A1 selected, which we'll get into in a bit, now borders are applied to that cell. Let's undo what we just did. Great. Now we know about these menus. One of the really cool things in this Help menu that I don't want to leave without discussing is down towards the bottom, we have two very powerful things. We have the function list and keyboard shortcuts. To make things much more efficient, it would be wise to learn the keyboard shortcuts that are relevant to you. And you can get there by clicking on the button. It'll tell you what all the shortcuts are, and you can even search for shortcuts. To get out, we can click on the X. Let's go back into the Help menu and click on the function list. This will open up a website which gives you details about all of the functions that are available to you in Google Sheets. You can even search for functions and look for specific functions and categories. For example, maybe we're looking for a math function. We can click on this drop-down arrow and select math. Now, all of the functions in this list are math-related, and it might be easier for us to find what we're looking for. We can also sort this table by different things, by the name of the function, by the syntax, by the description, and by the type. And of course, we can filter by keywords as well. But let's get out of here. Now let's go through how to orient yourself within the Google Sheets environment. It's complex, no doubt, but once you get the hang of it a little bit, it'll make a lot of sense. notice we have columns across the top with letters. Column A, column B, column C. We also have rows that are denoted by numbers. We have row 1, row 2, row 3. And anytime you click inside of a cell, Google Sheets will tell you where you are. So let's click on this cell right here. It does a couple of things. The first is that we notice the B is a little bit darker than the other letters, and the number 2 is a little bit darker than the other numbers, which gives us an indication that we might be in cell B2, with the nomenclature always being column letter before row number. If we click on a different cell, again we see C highlighted and 4. So this would tell us that we are in cell C4. We can confirm this by looking on the top left right here. This also tells us where we are. We are in cell C4. If we click on another cell, now we are in cell D1. We can move across cells in a variety of ways. We can click around the sheet however we'd like. When we have a cell selected, and when I say selected, I mean there's a blue box around it, we can get to other cells by using the arrow keys, the right arrow, the left arrow, the up arrow, and the down arrow. When we select tab, or when we click tab, which is to the left of my letter Q on my keyboard, we can go to the right, and if we hold down the shift key and while we press tab, we can move back to the left. If we want to move down, we can click the enter key, and if we want to move back up, we can hold down shift and click the enter key. Now, one thing that you might notice about this enter key is that it takes 2 clicks to get down to the next cell. When we click enter the first time, we enter inside this cell, as you see our cursor blinking. And that is prompting us to enter something inside of the cell, whether it be a piece of data, a function, or a formula. It's only on the second click of enter that we actually move down. It's only on the second click of shift enter that we move back up. And now, I want to talk a little bit about ranges. Right now we have one cell selected, D7, and we can see that here. If we wanted to select multiple cells, we have a couple of options. One of the options is to click on the first cell that you want and hold down your click and highlight other cells or move down. So if I'm holding my click and I move down, now I have a range. And when I let go of my clicker, we see that whole range highlighted in a blue box. And we see that we have a range up here where it says D7 colon D14. Colon denotes a range, and you could really replace the colon with the word 2 when we're describing it. So we have the cells D7 to cell D14 selected, and everything in between. Now we don't have to go in one direction. We can click and hold on D7 or on one cell and drag to the right. We can drag it to the left. We can drag it up. We can drag it down. We can drag it in multiple directions at once. And if we let go of our clicker, now we see that we have the range D7 to G16 selected. Another way to create a range or to select a range is to hold down the shift key. If we hold down the shift key and we select with our cursor, with our mouse or our cursor, G7, we will select that range. And if we continue to hold down the shift key and select G15 or G14, we will expand that range. And if we continue to hold down that shift key and click back on G7, we'll reduce it again, and we can pretty much hold down the Shift key and click in different places to do the same thing that we had done before. What we can also do with the Shift key is we can use arrows to expand our range. So we can hold down the Shift key, and just like we're navigating cells, if we click on that right arrow a couple times, we'll go to the right, and then if we click the down arrow a couple of times, we'll go down, and if we continue to hold down the Shift key and click the left arrow, we'll go to the left, so on and so forth. Now let's talk a little bit about entering in data. We'll select cell A1, and let's give our data a header. We'll call this athlete. What we've done here is once we had a cell selected, we just started typing into the cell. And when we click enter, we see that there is something inside this cell. And when we click on it, we can see the contents up here in this formula bar. We can also see the contents inside the cell itself. However, there is an important distinction between these two things that we will get to in a little bit. So maybe we have athlete names, and in column B, we're going to have jump height. And click enter. And the way that I got data into those cells was simply selecting the cell and typing into it directly. And we'll see that again as we start to add some data in here. So if we select cell A2, we can start typing in athletes' names. And because we know that enter moves to the cell beneath, once we have activated the cell, then we can just continue to click enter after we enter in some information. So the first athlete's name might be John, and we can click enter, and we go down, just as we observed earlier. And maybe this is Abby, enter, and another athlete named Maggie, enter, and Paul, enter. And that's it, we just entered in data. Maybe Abby's name we spelled incorrectly. The way that we can edit what is in this cell is we can select it, and we have two options. The first is we can go up to our formula bar and say maybe we meant to say Abigail, and click enter. Another way to do it is by double-clicking inside the cell itself, and we can edit it here. Say, oh, actually we did mean Abby, but there should have been a IE and not a Y. And click enter. That's how we edit data inside of cells. To remove data inside of cells, let's see what happens. Let's add in Adam. And click enter. And Adam wasn't supposed to be there. We can highlight Adam in the formula bar and click the backspace and click enter. But now I'm going to hold down Control and click Z, which is a shortcut or a hotkey, to undo what I just did to bring Adam back. We can also, again, double click inside the cell and remove Adam, click enter, and let's undo that again. We can also right click on the cell, and we can go to delete cells and decide to make a shift of the cells. So maybe we want to shift the cells left, or we want to shift them up. If we click shift up, and Adam will be gone. Now those two options, if you have data in other places, that may affect the way that it looks and feels. So typically, unless there's an intentional shift in all of the data, I advise against that. The final way to do it is you can just select the cell and click the backspace key, and all of the content will be gone. Now let's enter in some jump height data, since we know how to do this. Let's say that John jumped 2.4, and all we have to do is click on the cell and start typing. Abby jumped 2.8, and we'll call these inches. Maggie jumped, let's say 2.6, and Paul jumped 1.8 or 18 inches. Click enter. Now what we've just done is directly enter data into Google Sheets. However, there's a very important distinction to make between what is inside this cell that we see on the outside and what is inside this cell that we see in the formula bar. So if we click on this cell B2, which has the number 24 that we see inside the cell, and when we click on it, we see the number 24 in the formula bar. There are other ways to get the number 24 to appear in different cells without typing it in directly. And the way that we write formulas or functions in Google Sheets is we start with an equal sign. So if we start with an equal sign in cell C2, and we want this cell to say number 24, we might have a formula that does that. We might say we want cell B2 to go into cell C2 plus 0. So we're performing some math inside this cell, and we're using a reference of another cell. And click enter. And we could also get the number 24 in cell D2 by going equals 24 plus 0. And click enter. Now these are all different things. If I click on cell B2, we see the number 24 in the formula bar. Although we see 24 in cell B2, C2, and D2, if we click on cell C2, we see a formula, which is cell B2 plus 0. And when we click on cell D2, we see another formula. It equals 24 plus 0. Now, to show you that all of these are different, well, this one may not be, but if we change the number in cell B2, change it to 30, and click enter, this cell, cell C2, also changed because it is looking at whatever is in cell B2 and adding 0 to it. Whereas this cell, or cell D2, it is stuck on 24 because we manually typed in equals 24 plus 0. But in any case, the purpose of going over this is that there's a difference between what is in the formula bar and what shows up inside the cell. You could have all formulas, you can have all direct entry, but they're different things and used for different purposes. Now we can remove our formulas here. Now let's say that we wanted to get the average of all of these jump heights. Let's type in average right here. And to get the average, what we can do is we can go equals and perform an equation. We can say equals 30 plus 2.8 plus 2.6 plus 1.8, and wrap all of that in parentheses, and that gives us the total, and we can divide that by the number of athletes, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we divide by 4 and click enter, now we have an equation that gives us the average. Now that's a lot of work, and it doesn't accommodate for whether or not these values change. So for example, maybe we incorrectly calculated John's jump height, and it changed to 35. Our average does not change. So now let's try to solve this by creating a formula that works in a more dynamic way. And that way we'll accommodate for changing values. And now we'll again start with an equal sign because we're going to be performing some math. And instead of typing in the numbers, we can say we want cell B2 plus B3 plus B4 plus B5. And we can wrap all of that in parentheses to get the sum of them all. And then at the end of the formula, we can divide by 4 because we have 4 athletes, and click enter. And now we notice that the jump height went up because John's jump height went up. So this is dynamic. And if we change this 35 back down to 30, we'll see that the averages are the same, as they should be. Now let's move this back up to 35. We can calculate the average another way, too. We can use built-in Google Sheet functions to do this, which also start with an equal sign. So let's type in average here, and we can go equals, and Google Sheets even has a suggestion for us, and this is what we want. It's close to what we want, not exactly. But if we start typing in the word AVERA, or AVERA, we can start seeing all these Google Sheet functions that are available to us. GE, because we want to get the equals average, and we can open the parenthesis. And once you type in the name of a function, a built-in function with Google Sheets, and open the parenthesis, you can start selecting the values or start getting what you need to make the function work. And remember, in that help section, you can go and look at all the functions that are available. In this case, it looks like average needs values, and that will give us the average value from all of the values that we input between those two, between the opening and closing parentheses. And it looks like we can even get a range of values. So let's select, within this average function, let's select this range of values that we have here. And one little neat thing that you might have noticed with Google Sheets is that when we're using functions, it tells us what the answer will be before we even complete it, which lets us know how accurate our function is as we're going through it. It can be really helpful, especially when you're going through longer functions. And if we close the parenthesis, which now we're getting the average of the values between B2 and B5, click enter, and it works the same way. And if we change values in here again, so if we change Paul's to 25, click enter, now, again, we have a more dynamic function, but with a lot less typing. Equals average versus equals a bunch of cell references added together divided by 4 versus adding a bunch of numbers together and dividing them by another number. A bunch of different ways to perform math in Google Sheets. And the final way that I want to calculate this average is with another built-in Google Sheets function. Because so far we know that we can put in a bunch of numbers after the equal sign and do some math. We can use a bunch of cell references with some numbers and perform some math. We can use a built-in function in Google Sheets, or we can even merge some of these things together. So let's type in average again, and we can go equals SUM, which is sum, getting the sum of some numbers. Open parenthesis so that we see what sum needs. And again, just like average, it needs a bunch of values, and we can even do a range of values. So let's select this range of values. Now we have the sum of those values, close the parenthesis, and we can still use numbers. We can go divided by 4 and click enter. And again, we have the same result. So hopefully this has been helpful in that we can use numbers, we can use references of cells that have numbers in them, we can use built-in Google Sheets functions, and we can use built-in Google Sheets functions combined with numbers. You can also combine Google Sheets functions with numbers and references and cell references like B2 and C2 and things like that. Now, we've done a lot of work in this Google Sheet already. How do we save it? Well, actually, Google Sheets automatically saves, and it saves right into your Google Drive. Most products, you'll have to go to File, and there'll be some sort of saving option, and you'll have to save it to your PC. This all saves in your Google Drive, all online. However, you can make the file available offline if you choose, and if you use the Google Chrome browser, you can always access your Google Drive offline if you have the right settings. What we'll notice is that if we make a change to this sheet, for example, I'll type in Adam right over here, we see saving and save to drive. Every change that we make, Google Sheets automatically saves. However, the way that this sheet is currently set up would make it difficult to find, and we wouldn't know what's in it, because the name of our sheet itself is Untitled Spreadsheet. Now that's not very telling. Let's remove Adam, and it's saving again, and save to drive. There are a couple of different ways that we can name our sheet. The first is that we can click into this Untitled Spreadsheet area and name it. I'm going to name this Google Sheets Learning, and click Enter. Another way that we can rename this, aside from clicking inside of it, is to go to File, Rename. Now, we have one sheet in this Google Sheet, and by sheet I mean tab. We can add tabs by clicking on this plus button. And again, tabs are sheets. All of the sheets, or all of the tabs, together are considered a workbook. To name this sheet, we have jump heights on it. We might as well give it a name that represents what we're collecting. We can rename this sheet in two ways. By default, it'll be Sheet 1, and a sheet that we add after it will be called Sheet 2. But we can double-click on the tab, and it will bring us inside, where we can name the sheet. Perhaps we call it Jump Height, and click Enter. Or we can right-click on the tab, and go to Rename. That'll bring us to the same place. Perhaps we want to add an S on the end and call it Jump Heights instead. And we can click Enter. Now, how do we find out where this Google Sheet is in our Google Drive? There are a bunch of options. If we go to File, and we go to Open, we can look inside of our Google Drive. I have a lot of things in here. And look, here's my spreadsheet. It says Google Sheets L, and if I hover over it, it says Google Sheets Learning. If I double click on it, it opens it up in a new tab. And actually, this is an important thing to note. I have this sheet open twice. My cursor is over here, this blue one. This green one is another guy named Adam. If I go to my other sheet, that's where my other cursor is. Or that's where my cursor is on this sheet. And now I can see another guy named Adam. So all I'm trying to show you here is that multiple people can be in a document at once, and you can see where other people are, and it's easy to collaborate. For example, notice this Adam over here has their cursor over there, which is this person. Now that I'm in the sheet, I type in Adam was here and click Enter. If I go to the other person that's in the sheet, which is also Adam, just in a different cell location over here, I see the change happen live to my sheet. And I see Adam's cursor move down. So this is a very impactful collaboration tool in this way. Now I can even remove what this other Adam wrote if I want to, because there are not permissions set. And then it'll be gone on both of our ends. But in any case, that's how you open a Google Sheet. Sorry, I got off on a little tangent there. If we want to go to our Google Drive, I'll just type in Google Drive into Google, click on Drive. I can see the most recent thing that I opened, which is Google Sheets Learning. If I scroll down to the bottom of all these folders, you see I have a bunch of untitled spreadsheets, but if I look for in my drive, Google Sheets Learning, there it is. And I can click on it and open it up from there. I want to continue to focus on Google Drive for a moment because it's important to recognize. When we go into our Google Drive, we see a bunch of things in here. Now, they got in here from a variety of different means. We can put files into our Google Drive, whether they be an Excel file, a Word document, a video. It can take a variety of shapes and forms. And if you're familiar with other file sharing platforms like Dropbox or Box, it is essentially the same thing. However, because it's a Google product, in other words, it's Google Drive and we're using Google Sheets or a Google Form or a Google Doc, we can automatically integrate it within this Google Drive, whereas if you have a Dropbox account or something like that, it is a lot more difficult to navigate. There's no way to save an online, continuously updating Google Sheets file into a Dropbox account. Now, we have a lot of different options for how we want to view things. If we want to see this in order of the last time something was modified, we can sort it like that. If we want to see it by name, or all of our files by name, we can sort it like that. We can also completely change the layout or the way that this looks by clicking on these boxes over here in the top right corner. We can have a grid view instead. And it changes the way that things are organized. It's okay, you can always switch back to the list view. That's easier for you to read. One thing that we'll notice in our Google Sheet is that it tells us the last time that something was updated. This document was last updated yesterday at 8:49 p.m. Any changes that we make automatically get saved into our Google Drive, wherever this spreadsheet lives. So this spreadsheet is called Google Sheets Learning. The last edit was yesterday at 8:49 p.m. But if we enter something in here, let's say my name, I want to enter in my name, and click enter, it'll say saving and save to drive. It'll also tell us that the last edit was seconds ago. Now, if you can see the pop-up box that shows up over here, we have an option to view the history of this, of this file, which is an important consideration to make when you're going through updates, because you can always see the last time that you changed something, and when you're working with multiple people, you can see who changed it. Now let's see what that looks like. If we click on this, where it says last edit was seconds ago, it'll bring up the version history of the document. We can see quickly what edit was made since the last iteration, and we can expand each iteration for more details. We can see who made the edits, and we can see the time the edits were made. And if we want to revert back to an older version, we always have an opportunity to do so. For example, if we don't like the changes that we made here, we can click on these three buttons that say More Actions under this version that was edited yesterday. We have options to restore that version. We can name that version something else, or we can make a copy. If we decide to restore this version, and we choose to restore, now our edits are gone. That can be very powerful when you've made changes that you don't want to make. We could have also made a copy of that version so that we kept our current one alongside the older one. Now that we know a couple of different ways to get the average, there's one more way that I want to show you, and this is directly inserting a function that Google Sheets has. So if we type in average one more time, we can go to Insert, Function, and average is one of the first ones that pops up. There are also all of these other function options. And Google Sheets is great because it tells you, as you scroll through these functions, what each of them does. This is essentially the same thing as going to the Help menu and going to the function list. However, the function list generally gives a little bit more information. So if we could go to Insert and Function and select Average. And now the function is set up for us to select the values that we want to get the average for. And notice Google Sheets is telling us that the average of those values is identical to the ones that we've already calculated, aside from our first one, which wasn't an accurate average calculation that accommodated for changing data. But one thing that I want to point out here is this down arrow and this X. Google Sheets is trying to help us by telling us what the function needs. If we click on the down arrow, we can see more information. This is what we were looking at earlier. And if we want to learn more, we have an opportunity to do that too. When we click on Learn More, there will be something that pops up on the right-hand side that gives us a bunch of information about how to use the function that we're looking to use. Go through the sample usage, the syntax of the function, and some general notes. Google Sheets will also show you a couple of other functions that are in the same wheelhouse that might be meaningful based on what you're doing. We can click the X to get out of that side pane. We can click the up arrow to get rid of this expansion or the extra information. And if we already know how this function works, we can click on this X to get rid of it entirely. When we click on that X, we see a question mark pop up. The question mark is there to bring us back or bring the information back that we may have forgotten about because we click that X and that pane is no longer available. If we click on the question mark, we get what we had before. So if we click on that X and we select the values that we want to get the average for and click Enter, that's another way of creating a formula. Although it is identical to the other average formula that we did right here. We just accessed it in a different way. Now that we have all of these formulas, I think we should delete a few. And remember, the way that we can delete information is by selecting what we want to delete. And in this case, I selected a range because I don't want any of these things to be here. I just want one average. And all we have to do is click the backspace key. And if we made a mistake, we can click on the undo arrow. Or, let's remove this again. A shortcut for that undo arrow is holding down Control or Command if you're on a Mac and clicking the letter Z on your keyboard. That'll also do the trick. Now we can remove this data again because all we need is one average. And now that we know how to use formulas and we're familiar with entering data, let's go over how to move formulas around and replicate them in different ways. But before we learn about replicating functions, let's first learn about copying and pasting cells. There are a couple of different ways you can copy and paste a cell. The first is if you click on the contents of this cell, for example B2, which is John's jump height of 35 inches, we can right-click and select Copy. Then we can select the location that we want it to go, which might be C2, and we can right click and paste. Another way that we can copy a cell is, do you see this little box in the bottom right corner? So we can drag that box towards where we want to copy the cell to. So if we want this cell that is in C2, the contents of C2 to be in D2, we can look for this big plus sign. Once we scroll over the bottom right corner of the cell, click and drag over. If we want to copy this down now, and now that we have two cells selected, we'll copy them both down, is we can look for that arrow again and drag down. If we just want to copy one cell down, the same logic applies, where we would just select the one cell that we want to copy, go to the bottom right corner, see that big plus sign, and drag down. And of course, we can remove the information that we just added. Just like we can copy and paste one cell to one location using the right-click copy and right-click paste, you can copy one cell and paste it to multiple locations. If you want to paste it across a range, we can select the range, right-click, and paste. And it'll apply the contents of that cell everywhere. We can click undo or hit the backspace. Another way that we can copy and paste cells is we can select the cells that we want to paste or copy, hold down Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and click the letter C on your keyboard, and then pick the location that you'd like to paste it to, and hold down Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and click V. Those are the short keys for copying and pasting. Control C or Command C to copy, and Control V or Command V to paste. Now, you can also copy and paste the data inside a cell, or whatever is inside a cell, to multiple locations that are not next to each other. Using any of the methods already described, whether it's a right-click copy or it's a Control-C, we can copy the contents of one cell and select the cell, which is the first location that we would like to paste the contents. And then we can hold down the Control key or the Command key on a Mac and click on our mouse or on our trackpad to other cells that are not next to one another. As long as we're holding down that Control key or the Command key, we can select or deselect these cells. Once we have all the cells selected that we want to paste the information on, we have a couple of options. We can right-click inside one of the cells that we have selected and go to paste. Or if we undo what we just did, I did that by holding down Control and clicking Z. Might be Command Z on a Mac. We can also just hold down Control or Command and click V to paste the contents. And we'll hold down Control and click Z again to remove what we did. Just like you can copy and paste one cell around, you can copy and paste multiple cells around. The way that we can do that is we can select the cells, the group of cells that we'd like to copy and paste or move around, and we can then hold down Control-C. All the methods that we just described work for groups of cells, except for this one. The one where we select one cell, hold down the Control or Command key and select another one, and another one in non-adjacent locations. If we try to paste, we're going to get an error. But if we just select one cell and we click Control-V, we can select the next one and do the same thing, and the next one, do the same thing again. If we want to remove the contents again, we can select it all and click the backspace. Now, if you don't want to copy and paste and you just want to move a value from one place to another, there are a couple of options. The first is cut and paste. So if we right-click on the cell that we have selected, this 35, instead of copy, we can cut, which is Control plus X or Command plus X if you're on a Mac on your keyboard. And then we use the same pasting mechanisms that we went over before, where we can right-click and paste or hold down Control or Command and V. And now the contents of that cell have moved. We didn't copy, we removed and replaced. And if we undo what we just did, the same thing works for ranges of cells. Like we did here, we can hold down Control and click X this time, or Command X, and move to another location and click Command V, and everything will move. Now let's undo what we just did, this time using the back arrow. The next way to move cells around is by clicking on the cells that you want to move. Let's say that we want this cell. We select it, and we scroll over one of the sides where we get a little hand. Once that hand shows up, we can click and drag it around. And once we end our click on the mouse, it'll essentially drop the contents of that cell into wherever your mouse is. So right now, our mouse is highlighting F2. If I release my click, there goes the data. But I actually want it back. So I'm going to grab it again, move it over, back to C2, and drop. You can do the same thing with groups of cells. We can select all this data that we have here, look for a hand, click and hold, and the hand actually squeezes down. You can see if I release this click, the hand is open. When I click, the hand closes down, and we can move it and drop. But we actually want it back where it was before, so let's click, drag, and drop. Great. Now let's see what happens with formulas. But before we do that, let's add some more data. Let's say that we have jump heights of these athletes. We also have body mass. And we also have, say, weight lifted. Body mass, let's say this is in pounds. It might be 200, 175, 205, and 190. For weight lifted, let's say this is in pounds. Let's say this person lifted 300, 425, 500, and 355. Now we have more data, and we were able to calculate the average jump height. But what if we wanted to calculate the average body mass? Well, we could definitely create another formula. We can go equals average, open parenthesis, and select all the values. But that's not efficient. One other way that we could do this is we can copy the formula that we have, calculating the average of jump height, and we can paste it over. And notice these two formulas are actually different now. Our first formula gets the average of cells B2 through B5. And we copy and paste the formula over. Now we're getting the average of C2 to C5. And this is because we're using relative references. We'll go over that in a moment after we continue to review how to copy and paste formulas around. It actually works the exact same way as other data. All of the logic that we just applied to moving data around applies to formulas as well. So we copy and pasted the formula over the first time, but if we remove what we did, we select the cell with the formula inside it that we want to copy and paste. We can scroll to the bottom right corner where we see the big plus button and drag it. And this way, it'll apply to all three of these columns. And if we want to remove what we've done, we can select again the data that we have and click the backspace key. Now, let's talk about a cool feature called autofill, and then we'll deal with relative and absolute references. Autofill is really just a way of Google Sheets telling you, hey, I recognize a routine. Do you want me to populate that routine that you're going with for you? Well, you'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's add another variable for what these athletes have, and let's add weight per body mass, or weight lifted per body mass, because we want to know how strong these athletes are relative to their body mass. We can write a function to do this. We can go equals the weight lifted, which is cell D2, divided by the body mass, which is cell C2. And once we've done that, we can click enter. And what Google Sheets has done is it is telling us, hey, you're applying this function to these two cells, and you have a lot of similar data here. It's all next to each other. Do you want to apply the same function until the end of the range? If we click on this check, or if we hold down Control and click enter, it'll fill in that formula for us. Another option that we have is if we undo what we just did by holding down Control and clicking Z, another option is we can copy the formula that we have by holding down Control C or Command C, highlighting the cells that we want to paste the formula to, and either holding down Control V or Command C, or paste. And we'll get the same result. Now, one thing that I'd like to talk about briefly is pasting, because there are a lot of different ways that you can paste. What we did is we just did the normal paste. And what that does is it takes the contents of the cell and it pastes them, whatever that contents is. When I say contents, I mean the contents inside the formula bar, not the number itself. But if we want to paste whatever we see on the outside of this cell, not what's on the inside of the formula bar, we can still copy the cell and select the cells that we want to paste that value to. Right-click, paste special, and paste the values only. And you can also hold down Control and Shift and V to do it this way. If we paste the values only, now we have a formula in this cell, and in all of these cells, we just have the values. We haven't got into cell formatting yet, but there are ways to paste formatting around also, without necessarily carrying over formulas or values. But let's undo what we did, and let's say that we wanted to give this cell some special formatting. So let's make it 2 decimal points. We've now adjusted the formatting of this cell in some way. We can now copy this cell, and let's say that we just want all of these to have 2 decimal points. We can highlight the cells beneath, right-click, paste special, and paste the format only. And now that we've done that, all of these cells take on the format that our first cell had, or the cell that we copied had. Now, formatting can relate to colors, background colors, borders, among a variety of other things. And we'll get into formatting a little bit later. But let's stick on this autofill that we have, because we learned how to autofill. Another way to autofill is let's remove what we have. Let's remove all those formulas. Another way to autofill is to click on the cell that you want to fill the contents, or that you want to fill contents beneath, and double click on that box when you see the plus sign. So the little blue box in the bottom right corner, we can hover over it till we get the plus sign, and then we can double click. And when we do that, it autofills down to the same spot that Google Sheets would have autofilled anyway. Another way to do it, which we've already gone over, is we can select the cell and drag from this plus button down to where we want it to go. Although it's not auto, it's another way to fill with the same contents. And let's keep this data here and move on to absolute versus relative references, which affect autofilling. What we want to do here is, let's say that we want a new metric. We want this to be the difference in this athlete's jump height compared to the average. We'll call this jump height difference. And we can write a calculation or a formula to get this difference, because we know the average and we know each athlete's jump height. The function that we can write to do this is this jump height minus the average. And how we start functions is with an equal sign, or any form of math. So we'll go equals B2 minus the average, which is B11. And the answer is 6.5. And we can click enter. Now, Google Sheets has a suggested autofill. Let's take it. Now what happened? These numbers are not accurate. 28? The difference between 28 and 28.5 is 0.5. So what's going on here? Well, what Google Sheets is doing is it's doing the same thing that it did before, where, in this instance, with our weight lifted per body mass, we were dividing D2 divided by C2. And when we autofilled, then we started dividing D3 divided by C3. We went down a row, and the numbers changed too. So instead of looking at row 2, we were looking at row 3. And we did the same thing here, right? So we were subtracting B2 minus B11. And when we autofilled, now we're looking at B3 minus B12. And this is actually something important to bring up that I haven't talked about yet. Google Sheets is really helpful when you click inside a formula because it shows you which cells you're looking at. So we can tell B3, which is in orange here, is also in orange here. And B12, which is purple here, is also purple here. And we know that this is incorrect because we want to subtract 28 from the average, which is 28.5, not a blank cell. If we continue looking through this pattern, we see B4 to B13 and B5 to B14. We see the pattern. We see what's going on here. Now, how do we stop this? Well, let's talk about absolute versus relative references. What we're currently using are relative references, which are numbers and letters without dollar signs. That's the way that you should think of them. And what that means is that if we copy and paste a formula, which is what autofill is doing, autofill is copying and pasting a formula down. The numbers and letters change based on where it's being pasted. For example, we're looking at B2 minus B11. And when we paste this formula down, the numbers both move down one. So now we're looking at B3 to B12. And if we were to paste this formula to the left or the right, for example, let's copy this formula, or all of them, and we'll paste them over to the right, the letters move over. because columns are letters, and we've shifted this formula over one column, which means that instead of looking at the B's, now we're looking at the C's. Just like when we copy and paste this formula down, we look at new rows. Now, to stop this from happening, we can use dollar signs, because in reality, we want to subtract each of these jump height values from this average, which stays in cell B11. It does not move. The way that we lock in a cell, or we stop it from moving when we're using a formula, is by putting dollar signs before the letter and the numbers. So it looks like $B, $11. Now each of these dollar signs functions independently. The first dollar sign stops the column from moving when you paste the formula around. The second dollar sign stops the row from moving when you paste the dollar signs around. So technically, we can remove the dollar sign before the B, because our only problem is that when we copy and paste this formula down, the number moves from 11 to 12 to 13 to 14. But we want this number to stay at 11. So let's click Enter. And now, if we copy this formula that we have, and we paste it to these cells, well, these numbers look right. And if we click through each of the formulas, we have B2 minus B11, that's right. And we go to the next one, B3 minus B11, that's right. Well, essentially what we did is by putting the dollar sign before the number in our formula, we stop that number, or that row number, from moving when we copy and paste our formula. Now the same thing works for columns. For example, we have our average calculated for jump height. Now, if we copy and paste this formula as is, next door to the body mass column, column C, as we saw before, the columns change to C, and this works in our favor. However, if we undo what we did, and we put dollar signs before the letter B, and click Enter, and we copy and paste this formula over, now the column B doesn't move, despite us pasting the formula into a different column. So as you can see, the way that you lock, or the way that you put dollar signs before numbers and letters, will affect how efficient your ability is to copy and paste formulas around. Now let's go through one more example. Let's say that we add in more athletes into this data set. Say we have James, Freddie, Stephanie, Franklin, Adam, and maybe that's it. And let's say that these people jump really high. We'll say this is 40, 45, 42, 45, and 48. These are elite athletes that we have here. Now our average formula didn't update, and it's too close to all this other data. Before we move this data away, or copy and paste it away, let's update our formula. Because we don't want the average of B2 to be 5 anymore. We want the average of B2 to be 10, to include all of our data. And we can click Enter. Now look at that average. If we want to copy this formula and paste it away, because it's too close to everything else, let's paste it down here. Oh, our average changed. Why is that? That's because we're now looking at the average from B7 to B15. But we just changed our formula to look at B2 to B10. Well, why is it now B7 to B15? That's because we moved our formula, we copied and pasted our formula down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots. So instead of starting at B2 and ending at B10, our formula now starts at B7 and ends at B15. There are two ways to prevent this. The first way is we can click on our formula, and instead of copying and pasting it, we can select it and drag it down. Let's undo what we just did. Or the other way is to use absolute cell references, which is putting dollar signs before the number 2 so that the row number 2 does not move when we copy and paste the formula, and put a dollar sign before the number 10 so that the number 10 does not move when we copy and paste the formula. And if we click enter, and now we copy the formula and paste it down beneath, we'll maintain the average that we had before, and we can remove what's in this row. And one quick way to get rid of dollar signs or to navigate within them is to use the F4 key. You can hold down the function key, at least on a PC or a laptop that's Windows, and click the F4 key. So let's click on this B10 over here. If we hold down the function key and click F4, one dollar sign goes away. And if we do it again, another one goes away, or it switches places. And again, both of them are gone. And we can toggle through these different arrangements by holding down the function key and clicking F4. It's just a good hotkey to know. Speaking of hotkeys, or shortcuts, like the Control-C and Control-V for copying and pasting, and for the function F4 for the manipulating dollar signs or absolute and relative references, let's go over a few more that are crucial for sports scientists and for anyone navigating data. Let's remove the data that we added, the extra data that we added, and let's start in the top left corner. If we hold down the Control or Command key and click the right arrow, we're going to go all the way to the right of our data set that we have. And by data set, I just mean something is inside cells that are next to each other. And if we hold down the Control key and click the down arrow, we'll go to the bottom of that data set. And by data set, I just mean rows with data next to each other. And we can do the same thing by holding down the Control key or Command key, and clicking the left arrow and the up arrow. We can go around like a box. And if we decide to go outside of this data set, let's say we hold down the Control key and click the right arrow again, we're going to go all the way to the end of the sheet. And the way that we can get back from that is we can hold down the Control key or the Command key and click the left arrow, which will bring us to the most or the closest piece of data that we have. So, for example, if we add in the number 100 in this row, and we navigate to our data set and hold down the Control key and click the right arrow, we'll go to the next piece of available data. And then if we can hold down the Control key and click the right arrow again, we'll go to the end of the sheet. And if we hold down the Control key and click the left arrow, we'll go back to that first piece of data that we see. And if we do it again, we'll get back to our data set. And this same concept works for any direction. So if we hold down the Control key and click the down arrow, we'll go to the bottom of our spreadsheet. Hold down the Control key and click the up arrow, we'll get back to the first piece of data that we see. And because there's a number right here, if we go to column B and we hold down the Control arrow and click the down, or the Control key and click the down arrow, we'll get to that number, and we'll have to hold down the Control key and click the down arrow again to get to the bottom of our sheet. And to get back, we can hold down the Control or Command key and click the up arrow, and again. So that's a very efficient way of navigating throughout a data set. There's also an efficient way for selecting data that you might want to copy or manipulate. It works the exact same way, where we hold down the Control key and we click an arrow. But this time, we also hold down the Shift key. So if we hold down Control or Command and Shift and the right arrow, we will select everything to the right. And if we hold down the Control, Shift, and left arrow, we'll go back to the first cell. And if we hold down Control or Command and Shift and the down arrow, we'll select everything down. And then we can also go to the right after that, while still holding down the Control or Command key and the Shift key, while clicking the right arrow. That's a quick way to select different parts of the data set. Now, to select the entire data set at once, all you have to do is click anywhere inside the data set. And again, by data set, I just mean columns and rows with information in them touching each other, or in cells next to each other, adjacent to one another. All we have to do is hold down the Command or the Control key and click A, the letter A on our keyboard, and it'll select everything. Now, a few other important things are selecting columns and rows. The way that we can select all the contents within a given column is by clicking on the letter that that column is. So if we click on column C, we'll select everything in that column. We can hold down the Control key and select another column that's non-adjacent, and another one. Or, if we want to select all these columns, we can select column C and hold down the Shift key and select the next column that we want, and we'll capture everything in between. The same thing works with rows. Select row 1, hold down the Control or Command key, and select 3 and 5. Or we could select row 1, hold the Shift key, and select row 5 to get everything in between. And just like navigating cells, you don't have to use the mouse to click every time. Once you select one column, or one row, you can hold down the Shift key and use the arrow keys. So we can hold down the Shift key and click the right arrow a couple of times to select multiple columns to the right, and hold down the Shift key and click the left arrow a couple of times to undo that, and hold the Shift key and click the left arrow again to select the column to the left. So we can navigate that way. With rows, it works the same way. We can select a row, hold down the Shift key, and use the up and down arrows to select different rows. And just like with selecting big groups of data, we can hold down the Control and Shift key, or the Command and Shift key, and click the down arrow once we have a row selected, to select all the rows beneath that in the data set. And if we still hold down the Control or Command key with the Shift key, and then click the down arrow, we'll select all the rows in our data set, or in our spreadsheet. And all we have to do is click the up arrow to get back to where we were before, and the up arrow again if we want to select everything above that row. Now, one cool trick to select everything inside of your spreadsheet at once is to click on the cell to the left of column A and right above column 1, or row 1. When we click on this little space with no column letter or row number in it, we'll select everything in our spreadsheet. To get out of that, you can just click anywhere in the sheet. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is that this sheet is not very pretty looking, and words are getting cut off. There are a bunch of different ways to format this sheet. The way that we can adjust column widths is either by scrolling over the column and looking for the arrows, and we can drag. You can drag columns and to make them wider or smaller. If we select a column, we can right-click and adjust the row width by going to, or the column width by going to Resize Column. We can either have it fit to the data that we have, or we can enter a custom width. Happens when we fit to the data that we have. Well, that's a perfect alignment. Or we can right click, resize column, and let's say that we want it to be 120. And this is in pixels. We can click OK or enter, and now it'll be that width, which does not fit the data exactly, but it was a custom assignment. If you wanted to adjust the size of rows or the height of rows, you can do the same thing by selecting a row and dragging it down, or by selecting the row, right-clicking, and go to Resize Row. You can also do this for multiple rows or multiple columns at once. So if we want all of these rows 2 through 5, to be the same height, but we want them to be larger, we can select row 2, hold down the Shift key for me, and select row 5, right-click, and go to Resize rows 2 through 5, and maybe we want it to be 30 instead of 21 pixels. Click OK, and now the rows are bigger. Now perhaps I want columns B through F to all be the same size. Select column B, hold down the Shift key, select column F, right-click, and we'll resize the columns, let's say to be 100. That seems to be pretty good. Click OK, and we notice that the words start getting cut off. The way that we can change that is by adjusting how the text looks, or how the text is formatting. So we can select all the cells with text in it, go to Format, and there are lots of different manipulations we can make here. But specifically, I want to wrap this text. So we can go to Text Wrapping and Wrap. What that'll do is it'll stop the text from overflowing into other cells. Now we might want to adjust the way that this text is oriented. And we can do that by going to Format and going to Alignment, or we can also do that to horizontally align. We can look at these bars up here, and let's say that we want all the text to be aligned in the center of the cell horizontally. We can select the 3 lines or the lines in the middle. And we can also orient the text vertically. We can do that with the icon next to it, the down arrow, pointing to a line. If we select that, we can decide right now it's currently formatted to the bottom of the cell. We can bring it to the middle or the top if we'd want. Let's go to the middle. Maybe because this is a header, we want the text to stand out. We can click on the B here to make it bold, or we can use the hotkey Ctrl+B to do that as well. So let's make it bold. Now, maybe we want to adjust the background. There are a couple of different options that we have here. The first is by clicking on this paint can and choosing the background color that we want. If we don't see a color that we like, we can click on this plus button and choose our own by navigating the hue and selecting the color that we want. Or if you know the hex code that you want to use, you can enter it in here. For example, 0101. But maybe I like this blue color. Oh, it's still going. Maybe I like this blue color here. So I'll click OK. And I can't really see the text. So if I want to adjust the color of the text, we can click on this A with an underscore. The current text color looks like it's black. We can change it to white. Another way to do this is to use alternating colors. Let's undo what we've done. We can go to Format, Alternating Colors. Or, you may have noticed, when we click on the paint can, alternating colors shows up here as well. When we select alternating colors, Google Sheets is telling us, oh, we understand that you have some data in here, and do you want there to be a header or not? Well, we do have a header, and if we have that selected, we can define the color that we want it to be. If we don't want a header, we can uncheck this box. But we do have a header, so let's click on that, and let's choose that blue color that we made, which automatically saves after we add it. And let's make the font white. And now what we can do is we can adjust the colors of alternating rows. What this is doing is it's going to create colors over multiple rows and alternate the colors, and we decide on what those two colors are. Right now, this is only applying to the range A1 through F1, which is only our header row. To get this to apply to more rows, we can change F1 to F10 and click Enter. Now we'll see the application of these two colors that are selected. Now alternate rows up until row 10. Our data set only goes until row 5, so perhaps we change this from A1 to F10 to A1 to F5 and click Enter. Another way that we can select this data is we can click on this box, this grid icon. And we can select our data range using our cursor. So perhaps we want to apply this to all of these cells. Notice it fills in for us, and if we click OK, now it's being applied to the range that we selected. We can reselect the range, or we can manipulate the text in here if we want to change that. So we can bring this back to A1 to F5 and click Enter. And now we have our formatting back the way it was. We can adjust these row colors here. Perhaps we want every other row to be this light blue instead of the gray. And we can do that. Now, perhaps we also want this text in here to be vertically and horizontally aligned. We can select the text, vertically align it, and horizontally align it. Maybe we want this text to be italic. We can do that too. Maybe we want this text to be a little bit smaller than it currently is. We can adjust the font size here. All of these options on this top bar, they're all accessible in the format options. We can change the font size from here. We can also change the font. Remember how to select the entire spreadsheet? We can click above the 1 to the left of A and choose the font that we want. I like this Varela round. Now the font is different. What we can also do is we can orient the text differently. So we can rotate it in all these different directions, or we can enter in a custom angle. For example, if we want it rotated tilted down, we could do that. If we want it rotated up, we could do that too. Or if we just want it to be normal standard text, we could do that too. It's a little bit misleading. But this more option, these are not formatting. These are more inserts. So there's things called filter views, charts. You can insert comments and links, a variety of other things. And let's just say that for whatever reason, we have some text over here. We'll say Adam 5, 10, 20, 30. We can quickly apply this formatting by copying the cells that we have next to Adam 5, 10, 20, 30, selecting either all these cells or just Adam because we selected a range. Right-click, paste special, and we can paste the format only. And when we've done that, we apply the formatting of these cells to Adam. That's a way to quickly apply the hard work that you've done with formatting to other areas of your spreadsheets. Let's undo what we did here. If we want to remove these colors that we've added, let's first X out of this alternating colors box. We can select any of these cells, go to Format, Alternating Colors. It'll bring up the formatting that we've applied. We can simply click this Remove Alternating Colors to remove it. Now, because we made our text white up top, we can't see it, so we might want to change the text back to black. And one thing that I missed here is I might want to select these cells and make sure that these are vertically aligned in the center. so that they match up with the data. Now, let's briefly go over adding and removing columns. To remove a column, there are two different things that you can do. The first is you can select the column that you're interested in. Maybe we don't want this jump height difference anymore, and we can click the backspace key. Let's undo what we just did. Another way is we can right-click on the column and select Delete Column. That essentially does the same thing, but the difference is that everything that was to the right shifted over one column. Notice this 100 is in column H. If we undo what we just did, that 100 is now in column I. There's a very important difference between clearing contents and deleting a column. The other way to just clear the contents of this column is we can right-click on the column and click Clear Column. And when we do it that way, or when we click the backspace key, the number 100 does not move. How you can add columns is by clicking on any column, going to Insert, or right-click and click Insert Left or Insert Right, depending on where you want the column to go. Again, inserting columns will shift whatever numbers there are in your spreadsheet. So let's say that we actually, after the athlete's name, we want to put a date. We can select column B, right-click, and go to Insert One Left. Let's undo what we just did. We can also just go to the Insert menu and go Column Left. And maybe we'll call this column Date. And now we can add our dates in here. 5/1/2021. We can copy that and paste it to the cells beneath, assuming that all these athletes perform this testing or these things on the same date. Now, what if we had more athletes? Well, we could definitely enter in their names below. But what if we wanted to have them not at the end? We wanted them in the middle. Well, we can add rows too. We can do that by selecting a row, right-click and insert one above or insert one below. Similarly, we can select a row and go to Insert, Row Above, or Row Below. So maybe we want a person named Adam right above Abby. We can insert a row above, and there it is. And we can enter in our data, Adam 5/1/2021. And maybe we'll just take this data from this person and paste it in here. Great. If we want to remove the row, as you would expect, it works the same way as columns. We can select it, and if we just want to clear the contents, we can click the backspace key. Or if we want to delete the row entirely, we can right-click and delete row. What other cool things can you do with rows and columns? There are two. The first is hiding them, and the second is grouping them. Let's say that for some reason we don't want to see Abby and Maggie. We can select these two rows, right-click, and hide rows 3 and 4. And when we do that, their data disappears. But everything in those rows is now gone. For example, if we were to hide row 5 too, this 100 would also be gone. So let's select row 5, right-click, and hide that row as well. Now the 100 is gone. And one thing that we notice is that it goes from row 1 to row 2 to row 6. And there are these two little arrows. How do we get our rows back? Well, there are a couple of ways. The first is by selecting row 2 and holding down the Shift or Control key and selecting row 6. Right-click, and we can unhide rows. Let's undo what we just did. Another way to unhide rows is to click on these arrows, and the rows will be unhidden. I don't think I need to show you columns because they work in the same way, but I'll do it briefly without much talking. We can select a couple of columns, hide them, and we see those arrows, and we see that it goes from D to G. If we want our columns back, we can click on these arrows. Now, there's something that's really powerful called grouping, because this is essentially hiding rows or columns, but also giving you the ability to unhide them and rehide them instantaneously. Let's pretend like Abby and Maggie, we want to have the ability to hide these rows, but we also want to show them relatively quickly. We can select these rows, right-click, and go to Group Rows. And when we group rows, we see this minus button show up, and we have an extra pane to the left of the row numbers. But nothing changed aside from that. But because these two rows are grouped now, when we click on this minus button, they get collapsed or hidden. And then when we click on the plus button, they come back. This is a pretty cool feature. If we want to ungroup the rows, we can right-click and ungroup rows 3 and 4. And now that pane is gone, and these rows are no longer grouped. And as you would expect, the same works for columns. We might have these 3 columns that we only want to show sometimes, so we can select them. And another way that we can get there also is we can go to Data and group columns D through F here. And now we see that pane open above the column letters. And it works the same way, where if we select this minus button, the the columns will collapse. If we select the plus button, they'll open back up. And the way that we can ungroup them is right-click. And just like you could access the grouping or the ungrouping from here, you can also group them from here as well through the right-click. You don't have to go to Data. I was just showing you another way of getting there. You can ungroup the columns, and that pane will go away. Now, the final way of removing rows, not columns, but rows, is through a very powerful feature called filter. Before we get into filters, let's add some more data. Let's select everything that we have, we'll copy it, and we'll paste it beneath. And let's just change these row heights to be the same as the ones before. We'll resize them to row 30. Now, if we select anywhere in this data set, we can go to Data, create a filter. Now, when we've done that, we noticed a few things. The first is that there's a green box that shows up around this data. What that's telling us is that this is all the data that is filterable within the filter that we added. Now, what is a filter? Well, a filter is a way of just seeing what you want to see if there's a lot of data in here. Before we move on, let's just change the date from 5/1 to 5/2 for these 4 people, and now we'll be able to see filtering in action. Let's say that we just wanted to see all of the data on 5/2 and not 5/1. We can click on these 3 bars next to date, which highlight green when we scroll over them, as they do for jump height, body mass, and all of our variables within this green box. Click on those 3 bars, and we have not only the option to sort our data in different ways now on the fly, but we can select what we want to see and what we don't want to see. There are lots of different filtering and sorting options, like you can sort A to Z, highest to lowest when it's a number. You can sort by color of the cell if you have cells colored in certain ways, and you can do the same thing with filters. So if we just want to look at the data for 5/2, we can uncheck 5/1 and click OK. Now, we see that date, instead of 3 bars, it has this filter icon next to it. And the only data that shows up is the data for 5/2. This filter lets us know that there's a filter on all of our information, or that not all of it is present. We can also see that in the rows. We have row 1 and then row 6, which indicates to us that there are 5 rows missing. To get rid of this filter, we can click on it. We can either we can either check select all, or we can just recheck 5-1 and click OK. And now our data is back. It didn't go anywhere. Similarly, we could use a filter on any of these variables. Maybe we just want to see the data for one athlete. Well, we can use the athlete filter. Say, I just want to see the data. Let's clear all of it, and just for Abby. And click OK. Now we just have Abby's data. And again, we notice the missing rows. We're missing rows 2, 4, 5, 6, and whatever's after until 10. And we see the filter icon here. And click on it, select all, and OK. And now everything's back. When we add a filter, or when we add this filter function through our data create a filter, we can also turn it off. But what filtering does is it also enables sorting. So if we just wanted to see this list sorted, we can click on the filter for athlete. Let's say that we want it sorted A to Z. We can select sort A to Z. And now our data is sorted. And don't worry, the numbers aren't getting jumbled up. Whatever was in Abby's row for 5-1-2021 will remain there, regardless of sorting and regardless of filtering. For example, let's just see this in action. Let's give her jump height 100, her body mass 100. Let's give her all 100s. And let's resort this. Right, so on 5-1-2021, Abby has 100s. Let's sort this Z to A. On 5-1-2021, Abby will still have 100s. One other cool thing about this filter feature is what happens when we add data to this data set. So let's add in another entry for Abby. Well, look what just happened. The green box moved down. And what that indicates to us is that now whatever is entered in here is now sortable and filterable. So if we enter in 5-3-2021 and we give Abby all 50s, and we want to sort this by date, it still works. 5-3-2021 will go to the top. Now the formatting could use a little bit of fixing to make it align with the table formatting. But in any case, it works. And if you remember how we can copy formatting over is we can copy all the cells that have the formatting that we want. Right-click on the cells that we want to format. Paste, format only. Now it's consistent. The way that we turn off these filters is we can go to Data, Turn Off Filter. And there are going to be no more bars and no more green box around our data. Now that we have some good data, we can create a chart. Creating charts in Google Sheets is quite simple. You can select the data that you want. Let's say that we want a chart for our data on 5-1-2021 for all of these people. Select their data. Maybe we just want the jump heights. You can go to Insert, Chart, or we can click on the chart icon right here, which does the same thing. Go to Insert Chart, and Google Sheets will give us its best guess at what we want to see. We can decide what goes on this chart by manipulating the x-axis in the series. But before we do that, we can choose the type of chart that we want. Google Sheets provides a variety of options, ranging from bar charts to line charts to area charts to combination charts where you could have multiple metrics. Now this doesn't really look like the chart that we want. We have our x-axis, which is Paul, Maggie, John, and Abby, but we have a series here, B7 to B10, which are our dates. We don't necessarily need those dates in this chart. So what we can do is we can remove this series. Now we just have one other series, which is C7 through C10, which are the jump heights. To make this more obvious, we can tell that Abby has a very high jump height relative to everybody else. But if we go to customize, there are a lot of different features where we can adjust the style of the chart, the series. We can add a legend if we would like, adjust the axes, and a variety of other options. I don't really want to get into that in this video. But if we click on series, we can quickly add data labels. And there, we can just confirm that this chart is for the jump height for Paul, Maggie, John, and Abby, because the numbers line up. And now we have a chart. That's great. To remove a chart, all we have to do is select it and hit the backspace key. Let's undo what we just did. Another way to remove a chart or to see other chart options is to click on the three dots, top right-hand corner. We can edit it, we can delete it, we can even download the chart as an image or a PDF. We can publish it online, we can copy it. There are a bunch of different options that we have. If we want to delete the chart, we can select delete. If we click on edit chart, it'll open up that side window that we had before. Another way to get to that side window to edit the chart is to click on a chart component twice. So if I double click on the bars, it'll automatically open up this side window and bring me to the series that the bars are, which is column 1. And we can change the color of these bars, just so you can see how it works. And now let's remove the chart. Click on the three dots and we can delete it. Now let's talk a little bit about images, because images can really spice up a spreadsheet. Let's add another column. Right-click, insert a column left. And we'll call this column Image. There are a couple of different ways that we can get images into Google Sheets. The first way is we can go to Insert, Image, and now we need to decide whether we want the image to be inside the cell or over the cells. Let's see what happens if we select Image in Cell. When we do that, we have a lot of different options. We can upload an image from our laptop or computer. We can use the camera on our computer to take an image. We can access our Google Photos or Google Drive. We can search an image on Google, like basketball, and select an image from there. Or we can enter in a URL for an image that we find online and bring it in. If we want to upload an image, we click Browse, and I actually have a couple of images here. I have an image for John. I'm going to click on that one. And there's the image. If we want to insert this image over cells, well, actually, first let's drag this image down to John, because that's where it belongs. We can go to Insert, Image, Image over cells, and we're presented with the same options. Let's browse and select John's image again. Now in this instance, we have an image of John that we can click on and we can move around and resize and place wherever we'd like. One of the drawbacks of this way of adding images is that if we put this image here, we can't click on our data unless we click away from our data and use the arrow keys to get there behind John's head. There's no way to send this image to the back. The way that we adjust the size of an image inside the cell is that we can adjust the cell size. Increase the cell height like that. We can increase the width like that. And notice the image is getting bigger. Let's undo what we did now. Now let's learn how to get images from the internet or via URL. Let's go to ESPN.com. I'm going to search for the image of an athlete that I know. Type in Serena Williams. Here she is. I'll click on her. Now this is an image that I want. We can right-click on this image, and there will be an image address. Or we can open the image in a new tab. Here's where that image is. This is also the image address. We can select this address and copy it. Go back into our Google Sheets Learning, into our spreadsheet. Select the cell that we want to insert the image in, and go to Insert, Image, Image in Cell, and select By URL. Then we can paste the URL that we just copied. And that's the image that we want. We can insert. And there it is in the cell. We could do the same thing over cells. Do Insert, Image, Image over cells. Again, we can select this By URL option and paste the URL of the image and insert image. And now the image is over the cells. Another way to get an image into a cell is if you know the URL and it's not tied into the image. What I mean by that is, let's paste this URL right here. This is the URL that when we click on it, it'll bring us to the image that we had. The same as this one. Let's remove that now. There's a function in Google Sheets called image that will take an image from a URL, or that will generate an image from a URL. So let's remove the contents of this cell. And images work just like any other cells. If we click the backspace, the image will be gone. Now in this cell, we'll go equals image, which is a built-in function of Google Sheets, open parenthesis, and the only thing that it needs is a URL. When you see items with brackets around them, that means that they're optional in a Google Sheets function. So the mode, the height, and the width are optional add-ins. The only thing that this function needs to operate is a URL. Let's see how this function works. Let's go to expand. It looks like that the URL is inside quotes. So what we could do is we could put a quote, paste the URL that we have, and end the quote, or put in another quote to give this function a URL, and close the parenthesis, and click enter. And there's the image again. This time we didn't insert it into the cell. We used a function with a URL. We can also use the URL that we have right here. So we can go equals image, open parenthesis, and instead of typing in a URL, we can select the cell that this URL is in. So we'll get the image of the URL that is in cell I6. And we can close the parenthesis and click enter. And there's the image again. A bunch of different ways to get images into cells. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is merging cells. Because what we might want these images to be bigger, but to get them to be bigger, we'd have to move rows and columns around. And it might affect other things in the spreadsheet, like this cell here with the URL in it. We don't need the cell to be that big. So let's undo what we just did. And let's look at what merging cells does. So I'm going to remove these images over the cells to give us some more space. And I'm actually going to change this function back to the static URL. That way I can remove the URL that's here. And this function will still work. Merging cells takes multiple cells that are next to each other and blocks them together into a bigger one. So I'm going to copy the image that we have here, and I'll paste it right in here. If we want this image to be larger, we can select the image and other cells to create a range. Notice we have a range selected, J6 to K9. We can go to Format, Merge Cells, and Merge All. Or we can use this icon here. where we can just merge cells by clicking on it, or if we click on the down arrow, we also get to merge all. And if we merge all the cells, we've now created a bigger cell. And when we select this one cell, notice it is a range now, J6 to K9. Now, there are certain intricacies within formulas where you don't necessarily have to use this range. You could just refer to this cell as J6, and it is known that this range goes until K9 because the cells are merged. But that's for another video. The important thing here is knowing how to merge and unmerge cells, which we can do by clicking on this button again, or just undid the unmerge. We can go up to Format, Merge Cells, and Unmerge, which would also be present in this drop-down arrow. Say Unmerge. And now let's remove this image. And let's readjust this column. Okay, great. Merging cells is also beneficial when you want to have a header for a spreadsheet. For example, I'm just going to drag all this data down. We learned how to do this. Select it all, go to the hand, drag it down. Now I might want a header for this data. We can select all these cells, merge them together, and call this Adam's Super Cool Data Set. And we can use the formatting that we went over before, or maybe we make this bold. We can make this the Varela round. We can increase the font size to 18. We move it horizontally and vertically aligned. Give it a cool background color. White font. And now I have a header. And it's because I merged these cells together. And now this is acting as one. That's another use case for using merged cells. Now let's remove a couple of things and go over conditional formatting, which is another very powerful feature of Google Sheets. Let's clean this up a bit. I'm going to remove this average because we've already gone through that. I'm also going to remove this 100. And I'm going to remove these tabs up here because we don't need them anymore. I also don't need Google Drive. Now I'm going to increase the row size here and make all these rows. We'll resize them to be 30. Now, what is conditional formatting? We already learned that we can color the backgrounds of cells by clicking on this paint can. We can color them however we'd like. What conditional formatting is it is automatic rules, or you write the rules to tell these cells how they should color themselves. Let's go through an example. The way that we access conditional formatting is we can go to Format, Conditional Formatting. It seems very simple at the beginning, but it can actually be very complex. The first thing that we need to decide is what range is this formatting or is this rule going to apply to. Currently, we have the range E7 selected, which is this cell. We can change the range by either typing in the cell location manually, for example, A1, or we can click on the grid icon and select the cells with our cursor. So maybe we want to actually select A4 and click OK. Typically, you don't apply this to a single cell. Typically, it's over a range, but you could apply it to a single cell if you wanted to. For this conditional formatting, we're going to apply it from A4 to, so colon, A12, or all of the names, all the athlete names. And the next thing that we decide is what rule we want to set. Currently, we are saying that we want to format all of the cells from A4 to A12 this way when they are not empty. We can change the way that the cells look when they are not empty, because that's the rule that we are applying to this range, by changing the formatting style. So if we want to make the cells bold when they are not empty, we can make them bold also. If we want to change the background color, Say, hey, we want them to be formatted red when they're not empty. We could do that. We could even say we want them to be red and bold and have white text when they're not empty. We totally customize the formatting of whatever cells meet the conditions of the rule that we set, which in this case is not empty. Now that we have our formatting set, let's pick a different rule. Maybe we just want to format cells that are only, and this will get overwhelming. We have is empty, is not empty. The text contains dates greater than or less than certain numbers. This can get very complex and very overwhelming very quickly. I just want to introduce you to the concept. Perhaps we want to format all of the cells within this range where the text starts with, and then we can enter in either a custom formula or the value here. The text starts with, let's go ABB. And when we've done that, we notice only Abby's name is now red. If we change the ABB to JOH, now John's name is red. Now let's play around with a number-based rule. Let's say that for these jump heights, we want to format all of them that are greater than or equal to 50. We want them to be red. Well, instead of text starts with for our rule, let's go to greater than or equal to. And instead of our range being A4 to A12, because these are names, let's change our range to be D4 to D12, which are the jump height numbers. And now let's change this JOH to 50. And now we can see automatically all of the numbers that are greater than 50 or greater than or equal to 50 will turn red. In fact, if we change a number, for example, let's say that Maggie jumps 55, and we click enter. Now that cell will be red too. And if she goes back down to 26, the cell will no longer be red. And let's click done. When you finish a conditional formatting rule, it'll show up here. Whenever you click on a cell that has a rule, it'll show up on the right-hand side if you're in the conditional formatting format thing here. So if we X out of this and we click on a cell inside of here and we go to Format, Conditional Formatting, we'll get the right side to pop up again. And we can always add another rule. For example, right now we have is greater than or equal to 50 is red. Maybe we have another rule. And let's make this a green formatting with a white text and bold. And we want to apply this to the same range, D4 colon D12. Now currently the rule is format cells that are not empty. Let's change this. Let's say we want to format cells that are less than or equal to the number of 25. Now we just have the numbers less than or equal to 25. Now what if we change this to greater than or equal to 50 and click enter? Well, we already have that rule, but why is this not showing up? Let's click done. Now we see that there are two rules applied to the same range. Both of these are the same rule, value is greater than or equal to 50, and they're both applied to the cells D4 to D12. The reason why the cells are red and not green is because the order of the rules matters. Google Sheets will check to see when the first condition is met, and if it is met, it'll apply that rule, and then it'll move on to the next one. But if a condition is already met and a rule is applied, it will not consider that for the second rule. It'll exclude the conditions that have been met from the second rule. So the way that we would switch these colors is to move this rule above this one, which we can do by going to the left and looking around these dots, click and dragging up. Now the cells are green. And to remove a rule, we can go over to the trash can on the right-hand side of the rule. So let's say that we didn't want this green rule in the first place. Now it's gone. And maybe, well, let's keep this rule for now because I want to add in the filter again. Let's go to Data, create a filter. We've already done this, so you should be familiar. But all I wanted to show you with this is that in this jump height column, we now have colors and cells. If we select our filter and we decide to sort by color, we can sort by the fill color, red. Now, all of our red values are going to be at the top. Along the same lines, we can click on the filter and go to filter by color. Fill color, red. Now, we only see the red values, and we see that a filter was applied because this filter icon appears now, not the 3 bars. So we can click on this filter. We already know how to do this. And we can select all, or remove the filter by color to be none. Now, let's talk a little bit about data validation, which is extremely important when it comes to data collection and data accuracy. And it can also be used to create really cool interactions within a dashboard in Google Sheets. Data validation is a way of making sure that the data that you've entered is correct. But like I said, it has other use cases. The way that we can apply data validation is by going to Data, Data Validation. Let's go through a couple of these options. Well, we won't apply any right now. The first thing that you do is you select a range of cells that you want to apply this validation towards. For example, let's select the data range by clicking on this grid icon, which you should understand by now is a universal symbol for click on this grid icon and you select the range of cells you'd like to apply this thing to. And let's select all of our jump heights, D4 through D12, and click OK. Let's say that we're collaborating with other people, and we know that any jump height over 50 is an error, because there's no way that someone could jump over 50 inches. The way that we can accommodate for that is we can go for our criteria and change this to a number criteria, not a list from a range. We'll go over that in a moment. Let's make it so this entry between D4 and D12, it has to be a number. And it has to be between 0 and 50. Or we could say it has to be a number, not between, less than, or equal to. There are a bunch of different options. We could also say it has to be a number less than or equal to 50. And then we decide if the data does not follow that rule. So if there's a number that is greater than 50, or that is not less than or equal to 50, what do we do? Do we show a warning, or do we completely reject the input? Let's first go for show a warning. Now this is difficult to see because of the conditional formatting rule that I applied. Let me go to Format, Conditional Formatting, and just change the background color of this rule to be a blue color. Now we can see that there's a warning. It says invalid. Input must be less than or equal to 50. So it shows us a warning, but it still allows this 100 to be in place. In fact, if we enter in the number 100 again, or somewhere else, we're going to just get a little warning flag that say, hey, you might want to check this out. Now, let's see what happens if we change our data validation rules. The way that we do that is if we have a cell selected that already has data validation rules, which all of these cells do, is we can click on one of them and go to Data, Data Validation. And we can see the range that this is applied to, which right now we're just looking at cell D7. But if we select all these cells and go to Data, Data Validation, we'll see that our range is D4 to D12. So whatever change we make will be applied to all of these cells. Instead of show warning, let's see what happens when we select reject input. And let's click save. Currently nothing. But if I try to enter in the number 100 to another cell, let's enter these numbers. They have to be below 50 to begin with. So let's say 48, 48, and 48. If we try to enter in 100, we're going to get an error message that says there's a problem. We say, hey, sorry, there's a rule here. You cannot enter in data that is greater than 50. So we do not accept it, and we will not allow you to do it. This is helpful when you're collaborating with other people and you want to make sure that your data is accurate. So all we can do is click OK and say, oh, well, tough luck. And if we want to change our data validation rule back, we can go data, data validation, say, you know, never mind, let's just show a warning, and click save. Now, let's change one of these to 55. And again, we're just going to get that warning. And I know this might look a little bit confusing. The reason why the blue is showing up is because of our conditional format rule. And if I remove this rule, no more blue will show up. But we still get that little warning. So that's how data validation works with numbers. But you could do the same thing with dates, actually. So if we select all of these dates and go to data, data validation, and let's just check the range. It's going to be applied to cells C4 through C12. That's fine. Click OK. What we can do is we can, instead of list from a range or a number, we can say date. Say is a valid date. If it's not a valid date, then don't let it be input there. Or we can say it has to be a date that's after a certain time, or before a certain time, or between two specific dates that you pick. But let's stick with is a valid date for now, and click save. And now let's change one of these numbers. Let's just put in number 1. Oh, well, there's a problem. Sorry, that's not a valid date. So again, we're protecting the integrity of our data. One other thing that you can do, specifically with dates, is that in any date cell, this is a cool trick, is you can double-click on the cell, and it opens up a little calendar, which then you can pick a different date from. You can use the calendar tool to do this. Let's say that instead of 5/2/2021, we want it to be 5/13/2021. Well, we can just select that date, and the date inside the cell will change. Just a cool little trick. We can also apply data validation for text. But instead of going through that, because it works very similar to the numbers and the dates, let's see how to make a drop-down menu that needs to meet conditions. So let's say that we have a list of people. I'm going to put this list over here. We have Abby, Paul, Maggie, and John. Don't worry about the formatting. And let's say that we can only enter in names that are in this list, because anything else would mean that it's an inaccurate name and we don't know who that person is. We can select our cells here and go to Data, Data Validation, and select List from a Range. Let's just check and make sure that our range of application is okay. Yes, we want to apply this data validation from A4 through A12. Perfect. Click OK. And let's reject the input. Now we need to pick the range of items that are allowed to be input into these cells. So let's click on this grid icon, and let's select these 4 items: Abby, Paul, Maggie, and John, and click OK. And save. Now, what just happened? That's cool. Now we have a drop-down list of all the names that we can pick from here. And we essentially cannot input a name that we don't have available. However, with these drop-down lists, you can always type in something manually. Let's say I try to type in Adam. and click Enter. Again, because we rejected the input, we said no, it has to be from the list of names. Now we are discouraged or disabled from entering in an invalid name. Click OK. What we could do is we could change the name on the list. So maybe instead of Abby, it has to be Abby with a Y. And right when we do that, immediately we see, oh, here's an error. And when we click on the drop-down list, now the name has to be Abby. So what you'll notice about data validation is when you apply it after the fact, after you already have data and you want to reject the input, it'll just give you a warning. But after that, for example, we select the new Abby, and if we try to type in Abby with an IE again, now it'll reject the input. So that's an important note, is it'll always show a warning at first, and then it'll reject input from there on out, unless you have the reject input set before you start entering in information. So those are some cool tricks with data validation, and hopefully that allows you to make insights on how to apply this stuff. And without making this too complex, I just want to quickly show you how to make something somewhat interactive. We're going to go into this in a lot more detail in an upcoming project course that'll also be on YouTube. But let's copy this drop-down list that we have, and we can paste it over here using Control-V, and it maintains all of its functionality. Remember, we could right-click and paste special and just paste the values or something else, but because we just copy and paste it, it'll maintain its functionality. We can write a simple statement here, where we can say equals if, which is a built-in function of Google Sheets, open parenthesis. Pretty much what if statement does, it says if something is true, do this, and if it's not true, then do that. So what we want to put in this box is we're going to say if this name in our drop-down list equals, quote, John, end quote, which is how you use text in Google Sheets formulas, as you put quotes around it. If that's true, comma, so if that value is true, what do we want to do? If that's true, let's click on cell B8. So if that's true, then we want cell B8 to be in this cell that we're typing in this formula in, comma. If that's not true, then let's just do a quote, quote, which just means make the cell blank. And we'll close the parenthesis and click Enter. And now we see this picture of John here. But if we change the name to someone else, the picture is blank. So we can use a drop-down list, let's pick John, to get information about someone in a data set. We can create an interactive experience using some data validation tools to show things in different ways. So that's pretty cool. And the last thing that I want to go over in this video prior to talking about downloading spreadsheets and how to share them is import functions. If you've used Microsoft Excel, you probably haven't seen too many import functions, but Google Sheets is different in that it has a bunch of them. Now, import functions work in a couple of ways. You can get data from another Google Sheet. You can get data from a website. You can get data from an Excel file or different file types. And we'll go over that now. But first, let's remove all this stuff that we have over here, which will break our drop-down menus. So we'll go to data validation here, and we'll remove it for this cell. If we click on our range, we see that it's J4 to L7. Let's remove it. And let's remove the data validation across this entire thing. Let's select all these cells, go to data, data validation, and to remove it, we can just click remove. And now we'll have no more of those errors pop up and no more drop-down menus. So before we learn about the import functions, let's make a copy of this entire workbook. The way that we can do that is we can go to File, Make a Copy. Now we can name our copy and choose which folder it goes into in our drive. or on our computer. And we can choose whether to copy the comments over, share it with the same people that this document is shared with, etc. We're going to call this Google Sheets Learning -import and click OK. Now, it's creating a new sheet, which is an identical copy to our Google Sheets Learning sheet right here. In this Google Sheets Learning import sheet, which we can see with its name, I'm going to remove all this information. There's nothing in here. Now, we can use the import function to get data from one sheet into another. In this blue box, it could be anywhere really, we'll go equals import. And once we type that in, we can see that there are different ways to import things. So it's import XML, which gets XML data. Import data gets data from a URL that is in Excel or TSV format. We can get data from RSS or Atom feeds. We can import data from a website. Or we can import range, which is getting data from another spreadsheet. That's the one that we want to do here. So let's select import range. The first thing that we need is a spreadsheet URL. And the next thing that we need is the range of values that we want to bring back. So the spreadsheet URL is, if we go to our Google Sheets Learning area, and we click on the share, and we'll go over this in a little bit too. We're going to first have to change the permissions. Change to anyone with link. This is essentially us saying someone else that is not us can use this URL. Let's copy the link. That is the URL for this spreadsheet. Now if we go back to our import sheet, and in quotes, we do a quote and paste that URL and do another quote, we have the first part of this. The second part is the range string, or what data do we want to bring back, comma. And in quotes, we need to give it the name of the sheet with an exclamation point, and then the range of cell, or the cell range that we want to bring back. So we can do quote jump heights, exclamation point, and then the range that we want to bring back. So in this case, we want A1 through G12 in our jump heights tab. So in our function, we have jump heights, exclamation point, A1 colon G12, and end the quote, close the parenthesis, because now we've given this import range the spreadsheet URL in quotes and the range string in quotes, which is the tab name with an exclamation point, and then the cell range that we want to get from that tab. And if we click enter, we have essentially the same thing that we had before. The only difference is this image here. And that's because import range does not support images in cell. The big difference between this image and this image is that in our Google Sheets Learning, this image is being driven by a URL, whereas this image is just an image that we inserted inside the cell. It's an important distinction to make if you're moving information across sheets. But that's how you get data from one sheet into another, and updates in one sheet will occur in another. For example, if we go to our Google Sheets Learning and we change, let's say, the name Maggie up here to Adam, and let's put something in this image column. Let's just say hello. And if we go back to our Google Sheets Learning import dataset now it says Adam hello. So we're automatically taking the data from our original sheet and putting it into a new one. Now, another import feature that we have is getting data from the internet. I think that's another really important one to go over. And it works the very same way, essentially, as import range. Test this by going to a website with some information on it. Let's type in ESPN NBA leaders. Here, this looks like a pretty good spot to go. Let's go here. Let's say that we want to bring in this data that's on a website, that this website will update on a regular basis, and we want that in our spreadsheet. Well, we can go to our spreadsheet and go to, let's say that we want to import the data over here. Go equals import. This time we're not going to do import range because we don't want data from another spreadsheet. We're going to do import HTML because we want information from a website or an HTML page. And it works pretty much the same way. We need first the URL of the website, and then we need to tell Google Sheets whether it's a table or a list of items. Then we need to tell it which number table or list it is on that website page. So let's go to the website that we chose, and we can copy the URL, which I just did. Go back into Google Sheets, and it looks like the URL is in quotes again. So we'll do a quote, paste the URL, end the quote, comma. Now we're in our query argument because the arguments, as you can see in the function, are separated by commas, and it highlights green. So now we need a query, which is either a table or a list, which is explained right here. So we do quote table because we want a table of information, and end the quote, comma, and the final thing is which table do you want? Well, let's start with number 1 because we don't actually know which table is which in this website. And we can close the parenthesis and click enter. And here's a bunch of data, right? Here's a bunch of data, and this looks like the data that we wanted, right? The first person, rank 1, Nikola Jokic, C, Denver, or DEN 72. We go to this website, we're seeing the data come from here. And now it's in our Google Sheet, and any updates made to that site will take place in our sheet. Some things are formatted a little bit differently than others. For example, these are formatted as dates, but if we select these cells and we format them as numbers, they should appear as numbers. And I know this is a little bit complex. The way that we use import functions is that they occur in one cell. So we did that import function in this cell. And when we click on other cells, we just see the data. So to remove all of this data, what you need to do, for example, if I click the backspace here, nothing's going to happen. Because what we really need to do is remove this formula that is taking, or that is providing all of this data. So if we want to remove all of this data, we just remove the formula, and all of the data will be gone. Similarly, the data that we're taking from our Google Sheets learning page through this import range function, we're not going to be able to just select cells and remove it. We're going to have to remove the entire formula. And there are ways to select specific pieces of data using a query function and other things, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So let's remove this import range function, and now all the data is gone. Now we can go back to our Google Sheets learning, and hopefully that import data stuff was helpful, because getting data into places is not a fun process, it's very repetitious. So if you're able to get it from other places, it can save you a lot of time. Now that we have this really cool spreadsheet, we might want to share it with people. We might want to allow people to edit it, comment on it, or just view it. But first, let me remove this hello, and we'll go over how to share. There are a couple of different ways to share with other people. The first is going up to the File menu and selecting Share. Here, we'll see a pop-up box. To get out of this pop-up box, we can click outside of it. I'll click right there. We can also get to that same pop-up box by going to the big green Share button in the top right corner. Click that, same pop-up box shows up. We share this document with people by typing in their email addresses right here. Or you might have an email list or a group of people contained in a group in your email account that you could add here. I'm going to add myself, a different email account though. Select that email address, and now we have a decision to make. We decide whether or not we want to make that person an editor, a commenter, or a viewer. There are certain settings and restrictions for each of these categories. Some of the settings can be manipulated by clicking on this gears icon. Currently, editors can change permissions, and they can share the file. If we don't want editors to do that, we can uncheck this box, or we can bring it back. And currently, viewers and commenters can see the option to download, print, and copy the file. If we want to remove that option, we can uncheck that box. To get back to the bigger box, we can click the back arrow. And now we have an opportunity. We can create a message or write a message to the person that we're trying to share the document with. Say, "Hi Adam, here is a sheet for you." If we're okay with that message, we can send it. And once we do that, that email address will get a message to their inbox. And we can see that a person was added here. If we go back into our share, we can see that there are now 2 people that this document is shared with. One of them is the owner, the other one is someone else, currently an editor. We can change their permissions here. We can make them the owner, we can remove them, or we can change their role within the document. Now let's see what this looks like from the end user, or from the person's perspective who received the email. I'm going to open up another window. We'll go to gmail.com. I'll sign in with my other account. Type in my password. And here's my email. Here's one from Adam Virgil. Well, that's me, but I'm sending it to myself. Let's click on this email. And we can see adam.virgil@gmail.com shared a spreadsheet. And they're inviting us to edit. "Hi Adam, here's a sheet for you." That's the message that we typed in. And here's a link to the sheet. We can click on this link or this one. Let's click on this one. And look at that. We're in the document. Here's our icon. Here's our Google account icon, which is different than the other Adams. And here's our cursor right here. Let's go back to the other Adam, or Adam, the main account's viewpoint. Now we see that this person is in the file. And we see where their cursor is. They have pink around their name, and here's where their cursor is. We have a couple of options here. We can chat with them directly. Say, "Hi Adam, nice to see you." And now we'll go back to the other Adams page. Oh, we have one unread message. Let's check it. Oh, that's the other Adam talking to us. Cool. Now, as an editor, we can edit things. So we can go into this weight lifted, and maybe their body mass was not 100, it was actually 200. And the weight lifted was 500. Maybe the body mass wasn't 50, it was 190. And the weight lifted was 400. Those changes will take place, not only for me, but if we go back to the other account, they'll also take place for this Adam, for everybody involved with this spreadsheet. And if we go to our history, where it says right now, last edit was made seconds ago by Adam Virgil, which is actually the other Adam Virgil, the one that we just shared the document with, we can see the edits that they made. Oh, they edited those 4 cells. And we can see the specific edits and timing of them. Let's go back. Now, let's say that we don't want to give this person access anymore. We can go back into our share box, click on the editor button, and remove them. We'll do that in a moment, but first I want to go over this bottom box in the settings. Currently, only people in this list that we've added to this list or purposefully share the document with can open up the file with this link. And by this link, Google Sheets means the link that you can copy from right here. And we can open up a new tab and paste the link inside. We can share that link with these people and they'll be able to access it. However, nobody else will be able to access the document even if they have that link. We can change the permissions so that anyone with the link that we just copied can have access. Currently, anyone with that link can view the document, but we can change the permissions. We can say that anyone with the link can comment on it or edit it. But let's bring this back to restricted. And click done. And now let's get out of this tab that we have here that had our link in it. And let's go over protecting cells and ranges. Now that we've shared the document with someone, we might want to give them access to certain things but not others. For example, although the second Adam is an editor, we might not want them to edit certain things. But we do want them to input the information for our athletes. For example, we might have a cell here, say do not touch, and we'll make it bold. And we'll give the background a red color, because we don't want anyone to touch it. We can protect this cell from being touched by going to Data, Protected Sheets and Ranges. A sheet is a tab. The way that we can add a new sheet is by clicking on this plus button. And there's a new sheet. We can remove it by right-clicking and going to Delete and confirming. A range is a range of cells that we discussed already. So let's add a sheet or a range. We can enter a description for what this locking is. Let's say this is important button. We're pretending like this cell is a button. And the range that we want to protect, right now it's one cell. We could select by clicking on the grid icon and removing what's there. We could select multiple cells and we see that change, or we could just click this button and click OK. Now we want to select Set Permissions. There are a bunch of options here. We can just show warnings when people are editing it, or we can actually restrict who can edit this range. By default, you can pick only you. That way nobody else can touch it. Currently we have it set to custom, and we're allowing multiple people to edit it. Let's just say only us. And click Done. Now the changes are saved. Now, let's see, I want to try to change it. I'll say do not touch again. And it worked. The word again was added. Now let's remove again. And click Enter. Let's see what the other Adam sees. Let's hop into his sheet. And now let's try to edit this cell. We'll say do not touch. Oh, there was a problem. When we try to edit it, Google Sheets will not let us. That's exactly what we want. Perfect. Let's go back to the main Adam and let's remove that protection. Or let's change the permissions. Change the permissions and let's say that custom can edit. And let's check the other atom. Give them the opportunity to edit that cell. And click Done. And click Done. Now let's go back to the other atom. And let's try to edit the cell again. So do not touch again, again, again. And we can edit it now. Alright, let's undo what we just did. Go back to the main atom here. And let's edit the permissions again. Let's see what happens if we decide to change permissions so that only a warning shows up when editing this range. And click Done. Now we'll go back to the other atom and let's see what happens when we try to edit. It lets our edit go through, but it says, heads up, you're trying to edit a part of the sheet that maybe you shouldn't try to edit. And that's okay. We can select OK, or we can say, oh, maybe we didn't mean to type into that cell and cancel. If we click OK, it's fine. The edits will take place. But let's remove what we just did. And again, we'll get the message. And let's click OK again, because we wanted to change it back. Now we'll go back to the main atom and remove these permissions. The way that we can remove them are we can change the permissions, or we can just click on this trash can icon here. And we'll get a message saying, are you sure that you want to do this? And we can remove it. Now the permissions are gone. You can have multiple sets of permissions over multiple ranges or multiple sheets. But this is an important way to facilitate who can access your sheets and how they can interact with them. And finally, if we wanted to, we could protect this entire sheet. We can add a sheet or a range. We're going to go to Sheets and just protect the entire jump height sheet. Now this gets a little bit more complex, but it's actually very, very useful. Let's just protect this entire sheet, and we'll set permissions. And only us can edit it. And we'll click Done. Now if we go back to Other Atom, and they try to edit anything in this sheet, they can't. You can't see me trying, but I am clicking buttons and trying to edit this sheet. Nothing works. I'm clicking everywhere. I'm trying to edit, type things in. Now if we go back to main atom and we change the permissions, and we say, except for certain cells. Now this is an easy way to protect most of the sheet, but not all of it, in case you just want someone to input data on one certain thing or interact with one certain thing. Let's say that we want Atom, the other atom, to have permissions to edit all of the names. So let's click on this icon, and we'll select A4:A. Now this is an important thing to note. If you don't put a number after the letter, then you're going to give that person permission, or it also works within formulas and everything else in Google Sheets. This essentially means that we're going from cell A4 all the way to the bottom of the spreadsheet, because there is no row number after the second A. The same thing works with rows. For example, if we went 4 to 4, that means that this entire row across the entire sheet will be a part of that formula or will be a part of this protection. So let's go A4:A, because all of row A will want the other atom to be able to edit in case they need to add more names. And we can click OK. And again, we can change permissions, but let's just click Done, because now we're protecting this entire sheet, except for A4 to A. And now we can go back to Other Atom, and I'm still clicking around, and I can't edit anything. But if I go into a name cell, I can edit them. I'll change this one to Maggie, is spelled a little bit differently, and I can. And we can undo what we just did, and we can even add names beneath. We can say this is Johnny, Frankie, and so on and so forth. But if we try to edit an image, we're going to run into problems. Not going to be allowed to do that. Let's undo what we just did. Go back to the main atom. We'll remove this protection by putting it in the trash or clicking on the trash icon and say yes, we actually want to remove. And finally, go back to the non-main atom or the other atom and see how we can click inside cells and continue to make edits when that permission is removed. And we'll change it back. Now, let's say that we've had enough of this monkey business from the other atom. They're causing too much damage to our sheet and they're screwing things around, and we just want to remove their permissions. We want to stop sharing the sheet with them. We can go back to the share button, select or go towards the person that we want to change permissions of, or the group of people that we want to change permissions of, and change them from being an editor to remove. If we make them the owner, they'll gain full control over the sheet and will be able to change my permissions or the previous owner's permissions as well as others. So let's remove them and save the changes. Now we see person removed. Great. And let's discover what happens on the other atom's end when this happens. We'll refresh the page. And now it's telling us that we need access. We no longer have access to the sheet that we once had access to. We can request it, but as you can see, we cannot edit or even get into the sheet as of right now. Let's go back to our main sheet, or our main page, but first let's close out of this incognito window, and we'll remove this do not touch button. Now we're just the main atom, nobody else is in this sheet. And we'll reset the color so that we're back to where we started before we went over all this sharing business. There's no question that being able to share the file with others is an extremely powerful feature from Google Sheets. If you didn't want to share with others, or even if you did, there are ways to download the file, email it out, and print it. And Google Sheets does a really good job of organizing that as well, making it very convenient. We can go to the File menu, and like we already spoke about, we can share from here or set up sharing permissions from here. We can create a new file, open an existing one, import a file, make a copy, or we could email the file that we currently have. All we have to do is email this file and type in the email addresses that we want to send the file to. And we can give a subject and a message. And we can even decide to send ourselves a copy. We can decide whether or not that file comes in PDF form, or a Microsoft Excel file, or an OpenOffice spreadsheet. Let's cancel. Or actually, let's go back in and send an email. We'll email this to adam.virgil100@gmail.com. We'll say, hey, here's your PDF, and send. Now I'll open another incognito window and just sign in to gmail.com with that email address, and we can just see what it looks like. This will just take a moment. Here's the email, and here's the message. Hey, here's your PDF. Because we removed their permissions to edit the file, we thought, hey, let's at least send them a PDF of what it looks like so that they can have access to the data without screwing anything up. And here's the PDF. Awesome. We can also download that to our computer as per any file attachment in emails. Now let's get out of this and go back to the Google Sheet. We can also, rather than emailing, we can download the file ourselves. Whether it's an Excel file, open document format, a PDF, a web page, a CSV file, or TSV file. Now, I want to go over the transition between Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel, because that's a common interplay that people work within. While the files may appear interchangeable through those download options, and because the software platforms look very similar, they are not. I'm going to write a quick function in cell J4. This function, the job of it is to take out all of the jump height values that are greater than 45 inches. We're going to use a function called filter. You don't have to worry about this. It's probably a little bit beyond the scope of the video, but it may make some sense to you now that you know how functions work. We'll go equals filter, open parenthesis. And what do we want? Well, we're going to want jump heights. So I'm going to select this range of jump heights, comma, and what the filter function does is you can tell it, oh, I want all these things, but only when something is true. It works just like putting a filter on a table, where we might want to only see data for the date of 5/3/2021. We're doing the same thing with this function. We want to see all the jump heights, but only when the jump heights in that range are greater than 4 or 5, or greater than the number 45. Close the parenthesis and click enter. The formatting is a little bit off, so let's just make them look like numbers so that we can see that the function works. We'll remove decimal points. There, we have our 3 jump heights that are greater than 45 inches. And we see them right here. Now let's see what happens when we download this as an Excel file. Go to File, Download, Microsoft Excel. Well, that's cool. We have an Excel file right here. Let's open it up. It looks nearly identical. That's perfect. Let's enable editing so that we can see what's going on. We have the table. And if you're familiar with Excel tables, they work very similar to Google Sheets filters. And it works. That's cool. We also have our image. But our image before was inside of a cell. Excel does not currently support images in cell. So at least our image shows up. Our other image, though, which was used with a formula in Google Sheets, does not show up. So that's one thing. But it looks like our other formula shows up. One nuance is that this formula does not work the same way, and we can't edit this formula in Microsoft Excel, or at least I have no idea how to. It creates something called the dummy function, and if you recall, in our Google Sheets file, we wrote run one equation, and it applies, or it creates these 3 cells. And if we remove that equation, or that function, all of the data is gone. But let's undo what we just did. And if we go into this Excel file, we'll notice that there's an equation or a formula in each of these cells. And if we remove one of them, it does not affect the others. What Excel is trying to do, I think, is they're trying to make sure that the data shows up here, although there are differences in the way that formulas and functions are written between the 2 software platforms. So, as you can see, some things work really well if you just have data entered in, and if you create a filter in Google Sheets, or it'll create a table in Excel, but some things don't work perfectly. So that's an important thing to recognize when you're downloading a file in Excel. You should not expect that it works as it did in Google Sheets. You will probably have to make many manipulations, especially if you have formulas. You can always X out of the Excel file, and don't save the changes. We can also go to File, Download, and download as a PDF. This will bring us to our printing area. This is what it looks like when we want to print. All we have to do is click Export. And there's our PDF. Let's open it up. Looks great. Now let's remove this formula that we have written here. And let's get into printing. But I don't want to print this sheet. I'm going to open up another Google Sheet that I have. One moment. This is my other sheet. The reason why I wanted to go through this sheet is because it will have to fit on multiple pages. Whereas this sheet will all fit on one page, and our manipulation of printing settings won't do it any justice. So let's go back to this sheet, which has a lot more information on it, and might take multiple pages to create a report for. Now let's go to File, Print. As we can see, it actually looks pretty nice as is, but maybe we want to maximize the space, or maybe we want it to be in portrait mode. We can select portrait. Now it's in portrait mode. Our current scaling of this document is that we want to fit to width. Maybe we want to fit to height. And if we do that, we notice that it gets smaller because it wants to keep everything on the same page. Or we can just go normal, 100%. And when we do that, we see that this file is way too big, or the images and everything are way too big to be 100% scale. But this is what it looks like at 100% scale. Maybe one just fit the entire thing on one page. And that's how it'll look. Notice the difference. It's much smaller now. Let's go back to landscape though. And we'll go back to fit to width. Maybe we want to maximize the space. And to do that, we can reduce the size of the margins. Right now, the margins are normal. We can make them narrow. And now our images are bigger. We can also make them wide. Or we can set custom numbers for the margins. For left, right, top, and bottom. Maybe we want the top to be 0.5 inches, and the right to be 0.5 inches, and then both of the others to be 1. Let's go back to narrow, because this brings up an important consideration. If we notice, let's actually go back to normal for a second. When we're in normal, it looks like we have a good amount of information here, and then there's another header that says historical data. So it makes sense that one page is historical data, and one page is whatever this is. If we change the margins to narrow, now everything gets bigger, and actually, part of this performance facilitators and defenders area gets sent to the next page. Well, what if we want narrow margins, but we still want to separate the pages as they were? We can set custom page breaks. Let's click on that. What this allows us to do is to adjust these blue lines to say, hey, this is where we're going to break off the page and start the next one. So let's scroll down a little bit and grab this horizontal line, and we'll move it. We can put it right here, or right here, right after the performance facilitators and defenders area. And we can confirm the breaks. We can also see in this page that the scale of our current document is 72% of its original size. This is helpful because we know what to expect regarding the size of the numbers and the letters. Let's confirm breaks. Now that we have our custom page breaks set, we see this little toggle icon. We can edit them by clicking on the edit button, and what we see is that the defenders are now up on the first page. And we now have narrow margins, and we have the page the way we want it to look. There are other neat features too. In the formatting area, you can decide to show grid lines, and show notes. Also decide how to orient the document, whether you want it vertically aligned center, top, or bottom. Same thing with horizontal. Currently, my grid lines aren't showing in the document itself, so there's no point in unchecking the See Grid Lines button. We can also add headers and footers. There are a bunch of different options, and you can even do your own custom thing. If you want page numbers to show up, you can do that. There's page 1, and there's page 2. If you want the sheet name to show up, you can do that too. The sheet name is called Testing Dashboard, and it shows up on the pages. We can uncheck them to remove. And if we edit custom fields, we can set up our own. Maybe in the top right corner, we want the date. This is the date icon. Let's say that we want the date to look like this. Now we'll have the date in the top right corner. Maybe in the top left, we want the sheet name. Let's add it there. And then in the bottom center, we'll have the page number. And maybe we want it to look like this. And once we click confirm, we'll see our changes being made. We have the date in the top right, the sheet name in the top left, and the page number in the bottom center. And we see that here too. Cool. We can go to next. And now we can decide how we want to print this. Do we want to just save it as a PDF? Or do we want to pick a printer? Also, we can decide how many pages we want. In our case, we have 3 pages. That's because I have formulas going down into the 3rd page. But we can have a custom page range. Maybe we want to print pages 1 to 2. Now that 3rd page is not going to print. And there are some other options here, but we're not going to get into those. When we're comfortable, we can go down and click Save. I'll choose where I want to save this, maybe right on my desktop. And we can give it a name. I'll call this Testing PDF. And click Save. And that's okay. We don't have to worry about any of this. My computer was waiting around for a little while. Click Reload. In any case, our PDF will save. I'm going to minimize our window. And here's my testing PDF. I can open it up. Here's my document. Awesome. Let's X out. Go back into our document. And we don't need this anymore, this sheet, so let's get rid of it. And now we're back to our main sheet. The final thing that I want to cover in this video is spacing, and how to manipulate space in a couple of ways. We already talked about this a little bit. You can always zoom out of your sheet and zoom into your sheet to see more or less cells at any given time. Let's go back to 100%. If you need more space vertically, you can actually collapse this whole top ribbon. The way that we can do that is by clicking on this up arrow right here. Now we have more space. If we need that stuff back or those menus back, we can click the down arrow. Another option that we have is we can go to View, Full Screen. Now that does more than just hide the menus. It also hides the formula bar. As Google Sheets says, we can click Escape to show the controls again. So let's do that. Click the Escape key. And now we're back to where we started. Another really important consideration that you'll want to make is that if you're writing long formulas or there's a lot of text inside of cells, for example, let's type in, I'm just going to type in a long sequence. Hold down A and hold down B. We're just going to let this go. Hold down C. Don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I'm just creating a long string. And click Enter. When we go into the formula bar, we only see the A's. We don't see everything else. To access everything beneath, we can scroll down to on the formula bar until we see these arrows, these up and down arrows, and click and drag to expand it. Oh, there's too much in here. Let's remove it. We can remove it. And when we're done, we can find those up and down arrows again, click and drag to bring us back. One other key feature, not necessarily tied into Google Sheets, but a really good thing to know, is how to skip lines. For example, maybe we have all this stuff called A, and then all this stuff called B, and then all this stuff called C. And when we click Enter, and we look at our formulas, we see A, B, C, and if we just keep on having letters side by side, because all the letters are the same, it's a little bit easier to digest, but it's not very organized. And if we want to deal with a certain letter, we kind of got to find it and go to it. One thing to make this easier to read is we can skip lines within this formula bar. We do that, at least on a PC or laptop using Windows, holding down the Alt key and clicking Enter. When we click Enter normally, we get out of the cell and we finish our formula or whatever we're entering. But if we click inside the formula bar, we can hold down the Alt key and click Enter to create a new line. Alt, Enter. And now we have the B's on its own line. We can go over by the C's and hold down Alt and click Enter to put C's on their own line. And, oh, looks like we need more room. Well, we just figured out that we can expand this formula box down. We can move on to the D's, hold down Alt, Enter, the E's, Alt, Enter, and we'll just remove the rest, but you get the point. We could separate things into their own lines so that it's easier to read. This comes in handy when you're writing longer formulas. Now let's remove all of this stuff and bring our formula bar back up and click Enter. And that's everything that I wanted to go over today. Hopefully, this video serves as a decent starting point for getting up and going with Google Sheets. If you have any questions, or if I missed anything critical, please leave a comment below. Let me know what you need help with. I'll do my best to provide support. If you enjoyed the video, or you got something out of it, make sure to give it a like before you leave this page. And if you enjoy the content of this channel in general, and want to be notified when new videos are released so that you can be the first to watch them, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.